Uh, for the global viewers, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are placed at the moment. And for all the Indians, Jai Hind. And let me wish the entire lot of researchers and mentors with the Indic Researchers Forum compliments for completing 1 year. And when it comes to the entire country, 75 years of independence again deserves applause for the entire country. And more important is because this is the time that you've chosen to have this international conference on counter-terrorism. Most appropriate. And I get this chance to do the inaugural address. A very big thank you to all of you. I want to start by highlighting the issue that India was born 75 years ago and immediately was followed by a tremendous amount of violence. So our birth was in the center of violence. Out of the entire entity of India, we were created as India. And that entire thing was left to people from the West to do justice to us, the so-called justice. And what happened thereafter was tremendous amount of violence. And while violence was not enough, which was a logical outcome of the partition, which was ill thought and ill executed. We were subjected to terrorism from across the borders, and Kashmir saw in 1947 and 48 tremendous amount of terrorism. That is where India as a nation goes back and looks at terrorism. So while we were victims of terrorism, the ones who were perpetrating terrorism on us have now started speaking that they are the victims of terrorism. Obviously, it would happen when you start creating nuisance for your neighbor, then the whole thing will come back on you. While that is being done, I want to also highlight a few things which most appropriately deserve mention. Yesterday, from the ramparts of Red Fort, our Honorable Prime Minister has given a lot of messages. And out of those messages that he has given, a lot of those messages are relevant to ensure that terrorism does not take place in our country. The neighborhood is what we have inherited. We could not have created a neighborhood. But in the neighborhood that got created and we were supposed to live along, there are a large number of countries which are either failed states or becoming failed states. And there is a lot of interference from major powers who have economic interests in these areas. The geostrategic and geo-economic interests in this region also gives a kind of push to terrorism, and India gets impacted. What was mentioned that 26/11 was the biggest one? Definitely, we had been telling the West, and especially those countries which matter even in Asia, what it feels to be at the center of the receiving end from terrorism, and would believe us till such time 9/11 happened. And after that, the global war on terror and all such initiatives happened. Otherwise, prior to that, when our parliament was attacked, our religious places were attacked, nobody seemed to have any sensitivity towards the sufferings that our citizens were having, whether it was in marketplaces, whether it was in educational institutions. So, who better in India would be there to explain to you how terrorism impacts normal life, growth of a country, security of a country. An entire generation has grown through that. An entire generation has seen how terrorism has to be countered. It's not something nice, but it is at least good for our future that we have become wiser in a troubled neighborhood and where our subsequent generations will know how to grow despite terrorism. And that is exactly what I think this particular uh, international conference should look at. While you may desire peace, but those who are your detractors will not let peace come to your area for various reasons, whether those reasons are for ideology, whether those reasons are for religious extremism, whether they are for radicalism, or whether they are purely for pulling you back in your trajectory of growth. These can be various factors. Now, since we do not have control over the others in the neighborhood, I want to draw the attention of everyone to the method and the kind of way research is done. We have seen for the last many years, research is being looked at from the Western prism. I think here, and especially because we are talking about Indic Research Forum, so we should be looking at a lot of wisdom that lies in our civilizational connect. If you see how there were norms of governance, we did not find terrorism when our ancient civilization was growing and when it was going ahead discovering wisdom. Those rules propounded by various thinkers, and the most notable one being Hillier. He taught us what is Arthashastra, what is its connect with politics, what is it connect with ideology. And there you find a large number of recent researchers who say that well-being of a country prevents terrorism. But you have to go beyond that. Well-being in the region also prevents terrorism. If you have failed states surrounding you or failing states surrounding you, you obviously will be subjected to terrorism as India has faced. The geoeconomics and the geostrategic interests of neighbors to ensure that our neighborhood comprises of such states is something that we have to watch for. The kind of environment that is getting created around India is now a realization for many other Western nations or Eastern nations, and that is when concepts like Quad take birth. Everyone wants to ensure that the neighborhood remains calm and quiet, whether it is on the continental borders or whether it is in the maritime. So we have in the kinetic or the apparent region, the land or the continental and the maritime domains. But we should be stopping at that. We should take our research work into domains like cyber. And cyber is something where there are no rules followed. It is very difficult even for the international forum to lay down rules. Is it that only the cyber hegemons will continue to do what they are doing and the smaller and the weaker nations will continue to be subjected to cyber crimes? There is very little difference between terrorism of one kind or the other. At the international level, we still have to find the rules of governance or the code of conduct in the cyber world. The kind of attacks that get launched against the weaker nations or the smaller nations, it is left to that particular nation to protect its critical infrastructure. That critical infrastructure is vital to the well-being of its citizens and the growth and peaceful existence of the country. So cyber is yet another field where we should be looking at very carefully. The recent event COVID is a pointer towards the possibility of biological and chemical warfare, and through, beg your pardon, and through the domain of such instruments where attributability is difficult, deniability is extremely easy. And in these incidents, entire humanity suffers. You look at the kind of mortalities that have happened, fatalities which have happened. You look at the international economics which has gone down. whatever the trajectories of growth and stability have been hampered very seriously. And here, when there is deniability, you can be rest assured that international organizations have to work extremely hard, diligently, and in a fair manner to ensure that such incidents do not get repeated. Terrorism is going to impact other domains also. Now, one of the domain which is for everyone's both prosperity, stability is space. And in space, if we are impacted by terrorism, you can imagine the kind of adversity we'll face, because today we are totally dependent on space domain as far as communication is concerned, navigation is concerned, the kind of awareness that is concerned, the research work that is concerned. So space is yet another domain where we should be looking at preventing terrorism, or at least before such things start unfolding, we should be looking at preventing such cases. So the international bodies have to look at these issues very seriously. Another issue which I want to highlight is various solutions for imposing counterterrorism. One of the good ways of doing was to kind of linking the financing part with terrorism, and the FATF was quite good at it by pinpointing the countries which were busy funding terrorism, and at least in our region we have seen the good impact of that. So the idea is that if international bodies take it upon themselves and come up with such solutions like FATF, then similar solutions are expected in the domain of cyberspace and the biological and chemical terrorism that may impact humanity. When it comes to plain or the traditional terrorism, while India resorted to use of governmental organizations, agencies and forces, a large number of countries went in for private military contractors and military agencies. And the impact of it was seen. It was quite horrific to see the kind of shocks that such operations did in Iraq or in Africa or even in Afghanistan. This is a new way of dealing with things, and this also will stabilize possibly. That is yet another way of thinking. While the states do not want to get embroiled with their state forces, so a large number of these private military contractors get unleashed. But then there has to be a method of regulating their use so that the excesses committed are avoided or controlled. So that is yet one more dimension which possibly this conference, if not brought in the planning stage, maybe in the discussion stage it could be done. And if it is not possible even in the discussion stage, it could be taken up as research work subsequently. Let me also bring out one more factor which is also correlated to growth of terrorism. We've seen corruption. Wherever there is corruption, and that becomes a fault line within a country, so that front opens up, because again, based on whatever corruption takes place, funds are available thereafter, and leverage is available to those who exercise terrorism, because quite a few of these corrupt people may be in power, and they may be leveraged into being associates with this kind of terrorism. They could also be those in positions of power who could be leveraged for terrorism. So these are various reasons and various options available for terrorists and those states which use terrorism to get the neighborhood or the far neighborhood into their domain. Ideology is another factor which we've seen, which is used to bring in terrorism and weaken a country which is the target country. And based on that, the internal turmoil and turbulence goes far beyond, and the state has to compromise on its growth trajectory. So most of the points I have highlighted. I wish the entire lot of participants all the very best. Indic Research Forum, you are doing a marvelous job, and you definitely, being the young minds, are aspirational, which the Prime Minister yesterday mentioned, that we are an aspirational society, we are an aspirational civilization. We do not believe in colonial mindsets, and colonial mindsets obviously would imply the same problems which our colonial masters faced. We do not want to go in on that particular path. We want to get out of that rut, and we want to be a peaceful and a developed society, which he called as Viksit Desh. And to be a Viksit Desh, we have to do our best to contribute towards our economic growth. And once we do that economic growth, there will be less number of aggrieved souls, less number of so-called troubled people, and that would reduce one more fault line from society which vested interests have been exploiting. Thank you so much. Wish you all the very best. Jai Hind.